For those of you who don't know me, my name is Russell Greene. I am very honored to have the opportunity to host the event, or co-host the event today, to elect Derek Cressman as Secretary of State with my friend Mimi Kennedy. Quick background, I'll be brief. I'm the chair of the Progressive Democrats of the San Fernando Valley. We've been together for nearly 4 years, although Leah continues to say we're a new group. I think in 10 years she'll stop saying that. I also, for PDA, am honored to chair the issue organizing team around the environment. Stop global warming. And PDA is organized around particular issues. And election integrity is clearly one of the most important. And frankly, the more I've thought on it, and I'm sure many of you have come to the same conclusion, I believe it's the mother of all issues. And clearly, nothing more important in terms of trying to transition all of the change that we're looking to affect. I will just quickly point out that we have a lot of people that are making a big difference in our political process here today. And they show up to every event. And so let's see, if I miss anybody, tell me. We have Ray Bishop, who is obviously on the e-board, elected delegate, chair of the Professional Business Caucus. I mentioned Mimi Kennedy, who actually is a co-founder and advisory board chair for PDA, as well as author, activist, and all of the amazing things that Mimi does. An actress, did anyone know that? Leah Hertzberg, Cindy Asner, Terry Brown, Mina Nichols is here. Where's Mina? Notice she's a candidate for county clerk in Ventura. Annette, Shirley, so many people. Mike Golden on the Progressive Caucus board. So thank you all for being here. Did I forget anybody?
Nina Merson is giving a couple of events for us.
Yeah, Nina. Thank you.
Teresa, always photographs us.
Wow, what a couple of weeks you've had in terms of making a difference in the actual elective process.
Yeah.
So I just note, hey Georgia, are you here?
Surely.
Could you pop in here for a sec? Not to embarrass you, but it occurred to me as I was thinking that I had the chance to introduce Derek, that my daughter Georgia will be 18.
Yay.
She's graduating from high school in a couple of weeks. And she's going to be going to USC studying vocal performance. But the reason I'm embarrassing her is to point out that she'll be voting in November. But when I was her age, election integrity wasn't something that we spent a lot of time talking about. Matter of fact, I don't remember talking about the Secretary of State race as something so important. But everything's changed, hasn't it?
Yeah.
And really, with this insane Citizens United and the insanity now of the McCutcheon ruling, there's never been a more important office in my mind to really rally behind. And I don't think there's ever been a candidate more amazingly qualified than Derek Cressman. And in my view, not only does Derek obviously bring the intellect and the experience, having 19 years and nearly 20 years experience in election integrity, but he also has this backbone that you can feel if you spend 5 minutes talking to him, of somebody who's going to fight, not back down, and stand up for us. So I'm honored to be able to host the event today, and with that, I'll stop talking and introduce Derek Cressman.
Thank you, Russell. Thank you, Mimi, for hosting us here today. And it's really neat to see so many other folks here who have hosted other events for me. So Scott Myers here, who's hosted something at his Lantern House in Venice. Ray's here. I feel like there's at least Nina Merson is here. So thank you all. It feels a little bit like we're getting the band back together, which is exciting for me as a newcomer to the Democratic Party and Democratic politics. So for those of you who have not met me before, let me just quickly recap why I'm running, and then we can talk about where the race is at and what folks can do to help. But I am running for Secretary of State in order to make sure that real people's votes count more than corporate money. And we've got a lot of work to do on both of those fronts, making the votes count and getting the corporate money out. I have spent the last 19 years as a good government advocate with nonpartisan groups like Common Cause and CalPERG, working on voting rights, on government ethics, on campaign finance issues. And that is totally not the standard profile for a statewide politician in California. But I came to the conclusion that that is exactly what we need in this office, because we need to do things dramatically different to turn things around in California and in this country on democracy issues where there's some real threats, and on other substantive issues like the environment, like our economy, so on and so forth. I know Russell and Mimi are very involved in Progressive Democrats of America. I am a progressive as well as a good government person, so I encourage you to take a look at that group. And I got into money in politics 20 years ago because of my concern about progressive issues and the challenges we were facing making progress there, running into the tens and hundreds of millions of dollars of corporate money that floods in on a climate change issue or any issue that you pick. So there are some things that the next Secretary of State needs to do that'll make a huge difference. There are some things that the next Secretary of State has the ability to do that will make a big difference. And then there's some bigger challenges that are really beyond the control of the next Secretary of State or any single elected official, but which I want to play a role in leading a national movement. So let me talk quickly about each of those. In terms of things that we need to do, there are several key reforms that have either passed the legislature, are in progress here in LA County, or Secretary Bowen has begun that will fall to the next secretary to implement. Real quickly, on the voter registration front, these are things like same-day voter registration and pre-registering high school students to vote. So you're 17, right?
Right.
Are you registered to vote? Legally, you could be right now in California, although in practice, most places we don't have it. We got a law passed 2 or 3 years ago that allows 17-year-olds to pre-register to vote. You couldn't vote until your 18th birthday, but you can be in the system even now. Most counties have not implemented this because we don't have a statewide voter registration database. And the next Secretary of State absolutely has to prioritize getting this done. It's been 10 years in the making, and we are behind almost every other state on this. The good news is that about a year ago, Secretary Bowen signed a contract to get this built. The scheduling is not to be done until June of 2016, so 2 years into the next Secretary's term. The other news that I'm hoping does not turn out to be bad news, but you never know, the name of the company that got that contract is called CGI, who nobody had ever heard of until last fall. Can anyone remember
Obamacare.
Obamacare?
Or Obamacare.
They are the company that built the website for the Affordable Care Act, and we all saw how well that performed. So that doesn't guarantee that they will screw up our voter registration database, but it really means we need a secretary that will stay on top of this process, that understands the details and is willing, quite frankly, to get into the nitty-gritty at a personal level and make sure that this thing works. Because where we should be in California, you have a driver's license?
Yes.
Okay.
Why don't you come out here so people can see you? Yeah, you're
So, almost every Californian, when they're 15 and a half, walks into a DMV. They tell the state of California their name, they verify their identity, they tell us their address, they give us every piece of information we need to register them to vote. What we could be, and somebody types that in, to a computer system, and if we're lucky right now, hands them a piece of paper to fill out again and manually send to the Secretary of State if they're over 18. But what we should be doing is automatically pulling that data into the voter registration database, flagging it so that on their 18th birthday they become eligible to vote, and you wouldn't have to do it.
Is that legal?
It is legal at age 17 now, and Secretary Bowen and Senator Hannah-Beth Jackson have a bill in, they were going to take it down to 15 and a half, which is what we really should do. I think it's now at 16, and it's pending. So, steps in progress, more work to be done. Game-changing improvements in our voter turnout, though. The best research that I've seen indicates that just one of these reforms, same-day voter registration, will boost turnout in California by 5 percentage points, 9 percentage points among young people. That is a game changer in terms of our electoral landscape for the next generation to come. So we have to make this happen. Those are some opportunities there. There are also some opportunities and some potential threats in terms of our election equipment. Secretary Bowen has been, I would say, the best secretary in the state, in the country. And I worked with Common Cause chapters all across the country. And there are still states in this country like Georgia, like Pennsylvania, that are using paperless touchscreen voting equipment that is insecure, that is unreliable. And Secretary Bowen decertified those here in California. That's the good news. The other news is she's told me personally that she's worried that on day 2 of the next administration, several counties, especially Riverside County, will make a move to bring those machines back. They still are storing them in warehouses. They're shrink wrapped. They have not given up because they spent tens of millions of dollars on these things that turned out to be pieces of junk, and they feel kind of bad about it. So there's a threat there, and then there's an interesting opportunity or potential threat here in Los Angeles County, where Dean Logan is undertaking the project of building his own election equipment. And there's some things incredibly exciting about this, because right now, almost every county in California, well, every county in California, and most of the rest of the country are dependent upon these private vendors who make shoddy equipment, who have secret code, who are often owned by political players themselves. It's a bad situation. So we've privatized our elections, just like we're privatizing most of government for the last 20 years, and we need to stop in many areas, including our elections. So the fact that we have a county government willing to take on this project, I think is exciting. The other interesting piece to it is they are probably going to do it using open source software, which means anyone can look at it and make sure that it is secure and workable. It doesn't guarantee, though, that it's going to be foolproof. People might have heard in the last month there was something called the Heartbleed vulnerability that was, in the software that was being used by Facebook, by banks, by all over the world, major entities, and it was hackable and had been so for 2.5 years. So we need, again, to make sure that we have a real elections expert in this office who will certify this system and test this system and make sure it is secure, because there's no longer a requirement that the Federal Election Administration Commission do this. So it places an even greater responsibility on the Secretary of State of California to make sure that this gets done right. Those are some things that the next Secretary has to do. An opportunity of what we could do is improve our voter information guide right now. When you look at surveys of especially young people, especially Latino voters, the number 2 reason that they give for not voting is feeling like they don't have enough information about candidates and ballot measures. Especially sometimes you're trying to vote for judge, I find, right? And there are 2 names on your ballot. You've never heard of either one of them. Well, the Secretary of State right now sends out the official voter information guide. It's this newsprint document. You probably all got it in your mailboxes about 3 weeks ago. And 100 years ago, that was the best thing in the country. It was a major reform to actually get people some information about ballot measures and candidates they're voting on. California was leading the country 100 years ago on that reform. It's gotten a little stale, in my opinion. And I think the state that invented the Apple iPhone and the YouTube video can upgrade this document into a digital app that you get on your smartphone, that you get on your laptop computer. We'll keep it the way it is. For those of you who like it, we'll still send you one in the mail. But for especially young people who don't get their information by mail at all and don't read actual books or newspapers at all, they spend their whole time doing this, right? Let's get the voter information on here. And we could give every candidate for office a series of online videos that they could use to talk directly to voters. This creates a level playing field so every candidate can get their message out to voters without being as dependent as they are now on the super PACs, on the corporate money, You'd still have all that stuff, but at least it's a bit like public financing of campaigns. It's a way for everybody to get their message out. And the other really big deal thing that we could do then is put the campaign finance disclosure information in the voter's guide. A lot of you may remember, I was talking with Mimi about it before, you know, in the 2012 elections, we had this secret $11 million come into California from a group nobody had ever heard of in Arizona, right? They called themselves Americans for Responsible Leadership. It sounds very nice. Who can be against responsible leadership?
You just put 125 million in, did you see?
Who did?
Corwell is one.
Yeah.
Wow.
Coke,
Coke.
125 million more.
Yeah, they spent $400 million in the last election cycle. They'll probably double that this election cycle. This is getting crazy. In that instance, they were purporting to be supporting campaign finance reform, which was the irony of it all. It was Prop 32, which was really about removing labor from the political process but keeping corporate money in the political process. It was the most unbalanced thing I've ever seen in 20 years of doing this work. And they were hiding the source of the funds. So the good news is we filed a complaint at Common Cause. 10 months later, we got these two front groups that they'd been laundering the money through fined a record $1.3 million. That's chump change for the Coke network, but it is at least a deterrent to someone doing it again. The other good news is it resulted in the legislature taking action, and just last week, Jerry Brown signed into law Senate Bill 27 that the Fair Political Practice Commission and Common Cause and League of Women Voters and the California Clean Money Campaign had worked on that makes it much harder to launder the money through the groups, because at each step you need to disclose who the sources are. So we'll be able to follow it back if you're an investigative journalist. And on a handful of issues that will happen, right? The 5 investigative journalists left in California will look into a few of these things. But what we really need to do is pull that information into the voter's guide and code all of these contributions by industry. So you could look at a candidate and see who their top 10 donors are by industry source, and we can attempt then to make campaign finance disclosure laws work. And this gets into another reason that I'm running, which wasn't, I was originally running really just on these policy issues, but as a progressive, I've come to realize, we're having a growing problem with corporate Democrats in California. As the state has become more blue, the corporate side is starting to abandon the Republican Party, and they are running corporate Democrats up and down this state, especially for the legislature. And we need to find a way to counter that. And one of the ways could be disclosure, but you need a couple of things to make that work. You need the actual data, which is what the Secretary of State can do. You need a way for voters to get that information. Then we also have to make sure that voters actually have a choice. Mm-hmm. You can't be voting between corporate Democrat A and corporate Democrat B, because then there's no way to hold anybody accountable. So we need some people to run who aren't taking the corporate money so that you can create a contrast. And we, quite frankly, have quite a contrast in this race. When I did this coding by industry that I'm talking about of Senator Padilla's contributions, you learn a lot more than if you just look at the individual names. You see that he's taking more than $100,000 from the telecommunications industry and sponsored a bill to deregulate local telephone service, a bill that AT&T likes so much that they've made it a model bill for the American Legislative Exchange Council, or ALEC, right? You see that he's taken more than $100,000 from the pharmaceutical industry, more than $100,000 from healthcare providers, more than $100,000 from HMOs and insurance companies. That's $300,000, and was one of 6 Democrats that killed single-payer public financing in our state Senate a couple years ago. So, but people don't know that unless we can pull this information into the voter's guide and we have candidates willing to raise it and offer a contrast. So I think this is not only just a policy solution, we as a progressive movement in California need to figure out how to start holding these corporate Democrats accountable and raising these issues. And ultimately, I am convinced that disclosure is not going to be enough. It's a little bit like getting a CAT scan from your doctor that tells you you've got lung cancer, right? It's disclosed, you've got a problem, okay? But to get better, you need to do some things differently, like stop smoking, right? and improve, or maybe you shouldn't have started in the first place. And same thing with this big money in politics. We need to not just disclose it, we need to get it out. And that is not something that the next Secretary of State can do. I wish I could, or I would be promising here and now that that's what I would do. But we have 5 rogue justices on our Supreme Court who are throwing out any form of campaign finance reform that works. And it is a systemic dismantling, really, of 40 years worth of work in the campaign finance reform movement, which has been tough, which has been painstaking, which I've spent 20 years doing. And they're just going through law by law and striking it down, right? So the most well-known one is the Citizens United ruling, where they allowed corporations to spend an unlimited amount of money on independent expenditures. There have been other rulings that then allowed individuals to do that and allowed them to coordinate doing that in these things called super PACs, right? So that was the big phenomenon in the last presidential contest that have basically made a mockery of our contribution limits, because now the Koch brothers or Sheldon Adelson or anybody can write tens of millions of dollars of checks to benefit a single candidate. And it really goes beyond even the campaign finance realm and is spelling into all sorts of corporate law issues, where the court is telling us that a corporation's a person and that they've got the same constitutional rights that you and I do as living, breathing people, where it says we the people at the beginning of the Constitution. They read we the corporations. So even on issues that have nothing to do with campaign finance, we're seeing the Hobby Lobby Corporation walking into the U.S. Supreme Court and saying with a straight face that we, a corporation that never has been to church or prayed, has a religious freedom under the First Amendment not to pay for health insurance for our employees that covers contraception. Because it is violating the corporation's religious freedoms.
You're the persona
Now,
of the corporation.
The owners of that corporation, I absolutely do believe, have religious freedoms, and they can spend their own personal money however they want. But when they incorporate and get the benefits that the state gives them as a corporation, they are no longer a person, right? They are a corporate entity formed for an economic purpose, not a religious purpose. It might be a different thing too if they were the Catholic Church. I mean, okay, you're formed for a religious purpose. Maybe there are some religious protections for that association of people. They formed for an economic purpose, not a religious one, not a political one. It is offensive to us as real people to be treating a fake person with the same constitutional rights that we have. So this is, you know, it's an offense to common sense. It's an offense to laws. It's ultimately an offense at the founding fathers and the notion of self-government when you have 5 justices asserting their own personal ideology over any past precedent, over any plain reading of the Constitution. So this is a moment where we need to use the checks and balances that the framers gave us and push back on one branch of government that has gone off the rails, because they knew that this would happen. We've seen the executive do it before. We're seeing the judiciary do it now. The legislative branch needs to push back by calling for a constitutional amendment, and I believe ultimately passing a constitutional amendment. I've been working on that since 1997. I used to be the sole advocate in Washington, D.C. with U.S. PIRG that was supporting a constitutional amendment. And there is now this huge movement that is underway that I think the next Secretary of State of California can continue to elevate. And the particular piece that I would focus on there is what's called voter instruction ballot measures. And this goes back actually to the Founding Fathers as well, where people would meet in town halls and they would send their elected representatives to the Continental Congress to represent them generally, but also with very specific marching orders on a handful of issues that they cared about a lot. We can do that again now, and when I was at Common Cause here in LA and in San Francisco, I helped draft and pass voter instruction ballot measures that instructed Congress to support a constitutional amendment to overturn the Citizens United ruling. They passed by huge margins. You know, it was 77% here in LA, 82% in San Francisco. I get that those are very liberal places, but same thing we did statewide in Colorado, 74%, 75% in the very red state of Montana, in every single county in Montana. And this has now become the defining issue in the race for the Montana State Senate to replace Max Baucus, where you have a Democrat running saying, I will uphold the wishes of 75% of Californians, and you've got a member of Congress running for the US Senate who not only has taken $20,000 from the group Citizens United, but is saying he is not going to follow the express instructions of 3/4 of his constituents. So we'll see what happens there. That will be a litmus test. I think we need to do the same thing here in California, and I've been calling for a statewide ballot measure here. I am thrilled to say that Senator Ted Lieu and Senator Hannah Jackson have taken this idea up. They have introduced a bill called Senate Bill 1272. Just yesterday, that passed through the Senate Appropriations Committee, and it will be heading to a vote on the floor of the California State Senate, probably sometime in the next 2 weeks. If it passes there and goes through the Assembly, every Californian this November will have a chance to weigh in personally on this issue. And more important than personally, because anyone can send a postcard or a petition now, we, the people of California, have a chance to weigh in officially as the electorate. Now, that doesn't legally bind a member of Congress to do anything, because they could still, as this guy in Montana is saying he would do, ignore 3/4 of what is, it's a little crazy to say, I want to be your representative, but I am not going to represent you. That's what it's saying.
Wow. Wow.
I think the next Secretary of State, as the chief election official, has really a duty to inform voters as to whether or not their elected officials are following these instructions. Okay, we can't legally force them to, but we can hold them accountable. And I would do that by holding an official hearing in every congressional district up and down the state, asking each member of Congress to come and testify. Here's what your voters asked you to do, what have you done? And then letting people know. So that's a bit about the campaign. I'll wrap up and throw it open for questions. People may want to talk about where we're at in the race, and I can get into the details. It is a bizarre and interesting and fascinating race that does create some real opportunities for a progressive to win. But let's throw it open. Questions, comments? Scott?
Talk about the online voting.
Oh, yeah, it's crazy.
Period.
One of the reasons I decided I had to get into the race is Senator Leland Yee announced his campaign for Secretary of State last fall on a platform of online voting, and my jaw just hit the floor. I was like,
Hello?
this is a guy who really does not know anything about voting, and he wants to be Secretary of State. And turns out he should not have been. There is actually another Democrat running on a platform of online voting, and my jaw has hit the floor. Again, he is not I would consider a viable candidate, but just the fact that people are out there credibly, credibly or not, we'll see, making this case. Here's the problem, right? It sounds great. And young people think, oh, this would be so great, right? I could vote on my smartphone. Cressman saying I get my voter guide on the smartphone, why not be able to just cast the ballot, right? And there are really 3 reasons why not. One is the actual security issue of whether or not someone can get in there and hack the votes. And so far, that has failed. The District of Columbia attempted to pilot an online voting program for overseas voters a couple of years ago. Within days, grad students at the University of Michigan had hacked in, inserted the Michigan fight song just to let them know we were here, changed the vote tallies, and they'd seen that China had already been in. And they, as a favor, closed that particular back door. They did not go forward with the test. Here in California, a student election within the last year was hacked into and changed, and the guy got caught, and he's doing a year's jail time right now. But clearly the voter security system wasn't there in that instance. There is disagreement within the tech community as to whether or not this security problem will ever be solved. There are some experts who I respect, like Ron Rivest, who's kind of one of the founders of internet commerce, who say the inherent structure of the internet means we'll never fix this. But I don't know, 20 years from now we could have a whole new internet. I'm not a tech guy. We'll see on that one. Even if that is someday solved, though, there are 2 other, maybe even bigger problems. One is, even if you can't get in and change the votes, you could crash the system. my website this week went down, along with Jerry Brown's and Alex Padilla's and hundreds of other candidates, because the service that we used to host the website was subject to a denial of service attack. They were sending out tweets saying it's because a terrorist group does not like the political views of one of our clients. I don't think that was me.
Oh,
But-
sure, wow.
Oh, I
My
hope it was
point
you.
is, right, the Affordable Care Act website crashed due to the volume of legitimate votes it was receiving. It's not that hard to ramp up millions of just pings into a system that cause it to crash even if you can't get in. So imagine it's election day and you're trying to vote online, but between 2 o'clock and 8 o'clock, you're unable to. And we have a contested presidential election in California that somebody wins by 537 votes, but we've got 640,000 people saying, I tried to vote and I couldn't. What's the Supreme Court going to do with that one in Bush v. Gore too, right? And this thing gets to the third problem. Cindy?
No, I was gonna say that they'll do what they do.
They'll do whatever
before.
the hell they want, right? Which gets back to that other problem. The other real problem then is you've got nothing to recount. Even if we all agree no one hacked in, and we all agree everyone could vote who wanted to because the system didn't crash, somebody wins, you know, like Al Franken's U.S. Senate race, right? He won by a handful of votes. It took them months and months to
And he didn't
do.
believe it
Norm
in the
Coleman
beginning.
won the electronic.
So, you need to be able to have a paper ballot to use as a recount, and not just any paper ballot, but a paper ballot that the person who cast it looks at and says.
And you need to hand count, please.
And you need to be able to hand count those paper
Never
ballots.
mind the
So,
scanners.
there's no way to do that with an online voting system where you're voting remotely. That's the problem.
Eric?
That's a longer answer maybe than you want to
No,
me.
add a length. Number 4 is that if you are voting online from some sort of a device, you will have to have a PIN number.
Yep.
You will have to have an identification to prove that you're not voting twice. Once that PIN number is established, anybody can find out how you vote. So say we have an election, say
Right.
it's not hacked, say everybody agrees, that's pretty much what the exit polls said. Well, your boss might say, you know, we really liked you for this job before,
Yeah.
but we think we don't like you now. How you vote becomes a litmus test of what kind of American you're seen to be. One would like to think that could never happen in this country, and I invite you all to laugh because of the last 10 years. So that's the other one. The private ballot would pretty much go away, and it would be targeted against you in some
And
cases.
we are already seeing, well, right now in Kentucky, more than 400 employers are sending out emails to their employees indicating a strong preference of how you should vote for the health of your
Wow.
employment.
Oh, yeah.
Wow.
The Koch brothers did this to 50,000 employees across the country last year. So the threat of employer intimidation is very real. Yeah.
Why isn't the executive branch of our federal government intervening when there is provable evidence that something is not right in this voting system with these machines?
Because they don't want to.
Well, it may be a little bit they don't want to. It is also the case that for better and worse, and there are both better and worse things about it, it is not the federal executive's role to administer our elections. Our elections are administered state by state, which means, you know, if a state gets it wrong, like Georgia has, they've got a terrible election system throughout their state, but at least we don't have it in the 49 other states, right? So it sort of limits the problems, but it also limits the accountability. And so it's a little bit hard to hold anyone accountable other than at the state level in Secretary of State races, which people until recently didn't realize how important they are.
Well,
Yeah,
the
that's it.
Constitution guarantees voting, and it, unfortunate that it doesn't say honest. It just,
There's actually no
ridiculous.
right to
So you really don't have,
No.
you're at the mercy
No,
of your
there's no right to vote.
state.
There's no right to vote.
But
you know that, right, Jared?
Also,
The Constitution actually does not guarantee a right to vote, particularly for president. And in fact, many states early in our country did not allow people to vote for president. The state legislature appointed the electors to the electoral college. We do have a right to vote for Congress, both the House of Representatives and as a result of the 17th Amendment to directly vote for U.S. senators. And we have right to equal protection under the law through the 14th Amendment and protections that have now been weakened through the Voting Rights Act. So this is another problem with the Supreme Court that we haven't even gone into, where they've struck down Section 4 of the Voting Rights Act. So I believe we need stronger constitutional protections for the fundamental right to vote. Representative Keith Ellison from Minnesota has actually introduced a constitutional amendment to do that, which I strongly support. We do have some protections. They're not there enough. But to step back from kind of the weeds of it, we shouldn't be sitting around waiting for the executive branch to do anything. I think President Obama's a great guy. I voted for him. I support him. He's not going to save us. This is a time when all men and women who love their country need to rise to the occasion and take it back ourselves. And same is true of the next Secretary of State. You know, I hope you elect me and hold me accountable, but this is not, you know, government right now is the problem. They are not going to be the solution. The people need to be the solution, as we have been. It's incredibly daunting. You know, people get very cynical when they realize that, right? That our government is bought and paid for, and my vote doesn't count as much as Charles Koch's. And it's led to a level of cynicism that is damaging and self-fulfilling. We need to push through that and realize our task right now is nowhere near as difficult as previous generations of Americans who've done just what I've said, and they've taken things into their own hands. So think about John Lewis and the Civil Rights Movement, facing water cannons as they're walking across bridges, facing police batons and dogs, seeing their colleagues hanged for registering students to vote, black people to vote in the South. They didn't wait for the executive branch. They forced the executive branch to act, and they forced Lyndon Johnson to sign the Voting Rights Act. And he did. He rose to the occasion that they created. Thank goodness he did. But if we'd have been waiting around for him, we'd still be waiting, right? So we need to take this on ourselves. Yeah?
Much in politics is about economics.
Yeah.
Does the Secretary of State have a sufficient budget to have the right resources to do the wonderful things that you talk about? And if a progressive gets into the Secretary of State's position and the budget does roll up to that person and there is not a liberal Congress to support that budget, or governor, how does that impact the position?
Well, the answer is mixed depending on the program. The federal government did give California $40 million in 2003 to build a new voter registration database. We've spent about $6 million of that on a failed vendor, so that's wasted, but we've earned far more than that in interest. So we have more than $40 million to do that project, which is the most important one. Where the funding, and we have a progressive Secretary of State right now who saw the funding for the office cut severely in the economic crisis that we just faced. What that mostly impacted was business registrations. And we had a year ago a lag time of 43 days to incorporate a new business in California because the legislature raided those funds. The good news is those funds have been restored, and this is a program I didn't talk about before, but like these other things, Secretary Bowen has started a program to automate the business registration systems. It won't be complete until June of 2016, well into the next Secretary's term, that there is funding for through dedicated fees that businesses already pay to incorporate in California, which we need to get to be lower, as Ray Bishop can tell you all about, but we need to get this program in place. So that isn't to say that we couldn't do more with more funds. I actually think we could see some cost savings by letting people opt out of these newsprint voters guide and using those funds to fund the digital guide, which is an inherently cheaper form of communication. So I'm not saying I won't be coming to you in years out saying, hey, I need your help getting more funding, but that is not the primary thing that's holding us back right now.
Yeah, Derek, so we're running out of time because the temperature keeps going up. Okay.
You mean in the room or in the planet?
Both. Everywhere.
Yeah.
Everyone. And so we have the resource of people such as yourself who and your colleagues, right? The discussion between the Secretary of State's office, the UC campuses, the next generation of leadership, the engagement that doesn't take place because we don't teach history anymore. Right, civics, all of what we want to call it.
Yeah.
So how are you seeing that play out? What are you seeing on the campaign trail? How is it that in a campaign where, 12% of the electorate, right, will decide who the two folks are who get to go to November, right?
Yeah.
You think that much? 12%?
Yeah, no, I think we
We're lucky.
may see 20% turnout in this
Right,
election.
so
We'll
12%
see.
to
But
turn 11.
in terms of the, Democrats.
Oh.
I wish I had a full answer to your question, right? We all probably read the newspapers. I don't think it was this Monday, it was the week before, but it's, the Antarctic ice shelf is now definitely going into the ocean. It might be 100 years, it might be 800 years. Whenever it happens, it's 4 feet of sea level change. I live at 3 feet above sea level. Wow. In Sacramento, California. It is pretty easy to get into such a dark and depressed state about that. You watch a Bill Moyer's program about the state of our democracy, and you just like want to commit heresy, right? I can't spell out for you how we're going to get from here to where we need to be in a very short amount of time. Just yesterday, the Senate Appropriations killed an oil severance tax in California. While complaining we don't have enough money to expand preschool, here's a place where there's a lot of money. We're the only state in the country that does not have an oil severance tax killed, and it's because of money in politics, right? I don't think, when I was in college, I was studying Russian, Soviet, East European studies, and people were arguing about how expansionist the Soviet Union was, right? I was writing my senior thesis on this. I was like 2 weeks from finishing my thesis, Berlin Wall falls. No one saw this coming. If you'd have asked any of the political scientists that I was studying a year before that happened, well, how exactly are we going to conquer the Soviet Union? Nobody would have had an answer. So I do not have an answer now. I am not even guaranteeing that we'll do it. But I know I've got to try. And I'm asking you all to try. I do know that previous generations of America have done more difficult things. I know that Nelson Mandela spent 27 years in prison, and things did not look very optimistic during the first 26 and a half of those years, right? And things changed. And we are capable of changing very fast and very aggressively in this country when we need to. Look at what we did to our economy during World War II, where we basically stopped making automobiles and started making tanks and airplanes in 6 months. We utterly revolutionized our economy when we had the will to do it. We could stop 6 months from now extracting any bit of coal, any bit of oil, and completely convert our economy in 6 months' time. We're very smart people. And if we had to do that, we could. Now, we do have to do that, that's the thing. But we don't have, in that instance, we had a functional public policy process where we could conclude what we needed to do. And even then, it took a while, right? Hitler was going crazy in Europe, and we didn't get in until Pearl Harbor. Well, the Koch brothers are going crazy extracting oil, and we have not yet had that triggering moment. But I think
Well, we have.
Yes, we
No,
did. We had a
but-
oil
it's-
spill.
we haven't triggered. But we, so all we can do is keep pushing forward, right?
Yeah, but we all
And-
keep driving our cars, every one of us. So we just keep adding to it, We're apathetic. We keep it for the next,
I don't think we are apathetic. I think that people don't
something.
know what to do.
And I guess my question isn't
yeah.
so much to ask you to answer. Because I don't think it's one person's going to be, and even if they were, you couldn't do it that way. It's more like, we have these things like Common Core, and I know it goes well beyond Secretary of State, but I also know toilets and running for, so on. Putting in, as you say, information into these little boxes but also putting it into the curriculum. And I think that you as Secretary of State might have some, dialogue role
Yeah.
to do that. So it's not about you, no offense, it's not about you,
Yeah.
but it's about us, and it's about folks at your level, engaging. And I was just wondering when you go to college campuses, whether people pick up on that yet? Whether
Yes.
they see the role that they have to play in shaping.
I think
their own kind
they're
of
starting to,
understanding.
I think they're skeptical that political involvement succeeds.
Right,
This is why they flock to things like Occupy,
right.
which is political in a different way, and which I applaud. I was down in LA last week marching with a group of people that are going from LA to Sacramento to get big money out of politics. I had to remind them, have you got your absentee ballots? You're going to be in the middle of Fresno on election day.
Yeah, right?
So it's not that they're apathetic, it's just, they are correctly observing that our political process is broken. And then they're drawing the wrong conclusion in that therefore it's not worth, participating in. So, anyhow, that's a quick answer. It is getting hot and stuffy. I can stick around. Ooh, I can't stick around for very long because I need to go do a radio program. Mimi's going
I'm
to wrap
getting up.
things up for us.
How lucky are we to have Derek Cressman? He really is amazing. So this is somebody to vote for and to support, because Derek, you're gonna make huge changes, and I'm really very excited. I wanted to say something about the absentee ballots, because I've said it everywhere I go, and there's always someone who doesn't know. Do you know, by the way, whether or not you are registered as a vote-by-mail ballot in LA? Does anybody know for sure whether they are a vote-by-mail? Okay. How many have no idea what they're registered as, vote-by-mail or not? You must look it up, because if you go to the polls, I think most of you are often voters, but young and inexperienced voters come to the polls, find that they registered vote by mail without knowing it, because an overeager canvasser said, oh, request to get a mail ballot is so convenient. They forgot that they did it, or they didn't know. They don't have their absentee ballot to surrender unvoted at the polls. Therefore, they must vote provisionally. And their ballot card is put in a pink envelope and counted after everything else is counted, days after the election.
If they're counted.
In a race like Derek's, it is so important to have his surge, his margin, show up right away, that none of us and none of the young people we know who are excited about him can afford to be a provisional voter. LA County gets mad at me saying, we always count the provisional votes. But I listen to the media and I know how important that margin is, and I know once facts on the ground are established, there are forces that combine to not change those facts on the ground, whatever it takes, including maybe not counting some provisional ballots for some marked up reason. So, the surrender rule, I call it the surrender rule. If you're a vote-by-mail voter, find out. Check your registration, check to see if the person at your address is registered for a mail ballot. If they've mailed a ballot to you, you better find it and have it to surrender if you want to vote at the polls, or you have to vote it before Election Day and send it in. Otherwise, you'll be a provisional voter. That won't help your favorite candidates. Ultimately, it might, but that's a long and messy process, changing that.
Are the vote by mails counted alongside the others?
The vote by mails are started to count on Election Day, and they must all be counted before the provisionals are open, because the idea is you have to check and see those signatures on the purple envelope, put the purple envelope away, put the ballot card into an anonymous pile so it's not associated with the vote. But they notice, okay, Derek Cressman voted. Then, if they get a provisional pink envelope from Derek Cressman, they know, no, Derek Cressman already voted. So it's a messy process and it's been gamed, but the most important thing a voter can do is know that you're a vote by mail ballot if you are. Don't leave it up to chance, and know where your vote by mail ballot is, take it into the polls and vote at the polls, or vote your vote by mail ballot and send it in or drop it off at the polls.
But it's safer to go to the polls with it.
I think it's safest to go to the, I think you should, if you're here and you want to vote at the polls, surrender that unvoted ballot and say, I'm voting here at the polls now. But you can't do that if you don't have your ballot to surrender. They'll give you a provisional pink envelope, and it'll be counted.
I didn't realize that, my absentee, I don't have to fill it, I can.
You don't have to fill it
I
out.
always
You-
filled it
Yep.
out and took it.
Big secret, I call it the surrender rule. You got it, surrender it, vote at the polls.
Perfect.
Because they present it to you as an either-or convenience. And nobody knows that this is a $1,000 bill that you better have on election day, or it's gonna constrict your ability to vote for your candidate and have your vote show up in the margin on election night, which is really what decides things because of the media. Okay, so we have Derek Cressman. We really don't have anybody on the ballot that gets anywhere near. In fact, everybody else on the ballot is gonna slide us farther away. And you reminded me to say something. The corporate rule, it's not about, but it's businesses. Ray could attest to this. You know, good people doing good business, making an economy run. That's not what the corporations are. They're big fish eating the little fish until they're bigger than nation states and they run the whole game. That's what, ironically, the right wing used to scare us so about the Soviet Union, a one-party system. They rule everything and their secret police are everything and you can't move. You have to do everything the state and the party say. That's corporate rule, and they want it globally. And they're probably pretty happy to divide up the countries. This corporation can have America, this corporation can have the European Union, this one can have Russia. That's what's going on now. So what we have to do as Americans while we still have the vote is go, we don't want to have it be this way. We're perfectly happy for corporations to do their business, but they're not, as you pointed out, religious entities, people with a conscience. They're not people. We're the people. So only Derek can preserve the ballot box the way that we need it preserved. Everything else is gameable, and these Secretary of State candidates don't get it, or they're taking so much money from big corporations that they don't see the problem having a big corporation run them and run the country. They just as soon have it that way.